Private elevator doors glide open on the 42nd floor of the Imperial Mirage Casino Resort, with the whisper-quiet precision that only unlimited money can buy. Security cameras mounted in crystal-encrusted fixtures capture everything in high definition. A billionaire guest from Hong Kong steps into the hallway, his Italian leather shoes sinking into carpet so plush it costs more per square foot than most people earn in a month. Beside him walks Edward Lang, the casino's most trusted VIP butler, immaculate in his tailored uniform, carrying a leather portfolio that contains $3.5 million in bearer bonds and cash. Eddie smiles with practiced warmth, gesturing toward the penthouse suite where champagne already chills, and the view stretches across the glittering sprawl of Las Vegas. The guest nods, satisfied with the level of service he has come to expect from the Imperial Mirage. Everything appears flawless. Everything looks exactly as it should. By morning, that $3.5 million will have vanished. Over the next 72 hours, 5 more VIP guests will report identical losses. The total missing will reach $18.7 million in deposits, all of them handled personally by the man with the perfect smile and the impeccable reputation. And by the time casino executives realize what has happened, Edward Lang will be gone, leaving behind only questions and an empty locker in a service corridor nobody thought to check. Before we descend into the sophisticated deception of a man who turned trust into his greatest weapon, take a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and hit that hype button to help more people discover the true stories of crimes that seem too audacious to be real. Now let's examine how one butler orchestrated the perfect inside job. Edward Lang lived in the rarefied world of ultra-luxury hospitality, where silence was currency and perfection was survival. At 42, he had spent nearly 20 years ascending from a Reno valet to the elite VIP butler of the Imperial Mirage in Las Vegas. The man billionaires trusted with their secrets, whims, and fortunes. His record was immaculate: flawless attendance, glowing reviews, handwritten praise from oil tycoons and film stars. Eddie could summon a helicopter at 3 a.m., fly in a chef from Tokyo by dawn, or redecorate a penthouse overnight to satisfy a superstition. But his true power lay in handling money, not chips, but the millions in cash, bonds and wire transfers that high rollers brought to fuel their gaming nights. Unlike other casinos that demanded paperwork and witnesses, the Imperial Mirage offered discreet service for its wealthiest guests. Eddie was the one trusted to personally carry their deposits from suites to the casino's financial office. It was a privilege that required flawless integrity, and Eddie had never once made a mistake. But that spotless reliability was no accident. It was calculated. For years, Eddie had been studying the casino's financial arteries, mapping every process, every signature, every unchecked moment. He knew trust was a form of currency, one he'd been patiently stockpiling, and when the time came, he planned to cash it all in. Eddie had identified the fundamental weakness in the casino's VIP deposit system during his second year at the Imperial Mirage. The weakness wasn't technical or related to security protocols. It was temporal. The casino operated on a schedule where VIP deposits received after 8 p.m. were logged into the system but not physically reconciled with vault contents until the following morning. This created a window, typically lasting between 6 and 10 hours, where substantial amounts of money existed in a kind of administrative limbo. The deposits were acknowledged as received, guests were granted their casino credit, but the actual cash hadn't yet been verified and secured in the main vault. This delay existed for operational efficiency. Late-night deposits were common in the VIP world, where guests arrived at odd hours and wanted immediate access to gaming credit. The casino had decided that it was better to extend credit quickly and reconcile the physical deposits during normal business hours, rather than make wealthy guests wait for morning accounting procedures. The system relied on trust, on the assumption that VIP butlers handling these deposits were beyond suspicion. Eddie spent months mapping out every detail of the deposit process. He learned which departments handled documentation, who conducted morning reconciliations, where deposits were temporarily held before vault transfer, and most critically, which gaps existed in the chain of custody. He discovered that deposits hand-carried by VIP butlers were placed in sealed envelopes marked with guest information and dollar amounts, then delivered to a secure holding room adjacent to the casino's financial services office. The envelopes accumulated overnight and were processed in batch the following morning. The holding room was secured with a keycard lock and had camera coverage, but Eddie noticed that the cameras were positioned to monitor the entrance rather than the interior. Once inside the room, there was a brief blind spot where the shelving units that held the deposit envelopes were partially obscured from camera view. This wasn't a security flaw exactly, more an assumption that anyone with legitimate access to the room would have no reason to tamper with the deposits. Eddie also discovered that the casino had recently decommissioned a service corridor in the catering wing due to planned renovations that had been repeatedly delayed. The corridor remained accessible with his master service keycard, but it was no longer actively monitored or regularly inspected. At the end of this corridor sat several storage lockers that had once been used by catering staff, but now sat empty and forgotten. Eddie claimed one of these lockers for himself, placing a simple padlock on it and storing spare uniforms inside. Nobody questioned it. Service staff routinely used empty lockers for personal storage. The plan began forming in Eddie's mind, not as sudden inspiration, but as gradual understanding. He saw how the pieces could fit together, how the temporal gap in reconciliation could be exploited, how trust could be weaponized, how a few hours of administrative limbo could become an opportunity for theft so audacious it seemed impossible. But Eddie understood something fundamental about human psychology. People don't question what confirms their expectations. If Eddie Lang delivered a deposit envelope, everyone assumed it contained exactly what it was supposed to contain, because Eddie Lang was trustworthy, reliable, beyond suspicion. The Imperial Mirage's annual Golden Dragon Baccarat Invitational represented the pinnacle of high-stakes gambling, an invitation-only event that attracted the world's wealthiest gaming enthusiasts. For 1 week each year, the casino transformed its most exclusive floors into a private gaming sanctuary where minimum bets started at $50,000 and individual hands regularly exceeded millions. The event generated enormous revenue for the casino and required careful orchestration of logistics, security, and VIP services. Eddie had worked 3 previous Baccarat invitationals, each time handling the arrival and accommodation of ultra-high net worth guests who brought staggering amounts of money to fund their gaming activities. He knew the event's rhythms intimately, understood how the concentration of wealth and activity created operational stress that stretched the casino's systems to their limits. During the invitational, normal protocols were often abbreviated to maintain service speed. Everyone was focused on keeping guests happy and ensuring smooth gaming operations. Attention to routine administrative procedures suffered in the chaos. This year's invitational was scheduled to host over 100 guests with a combined estimated gaming budget exceeding $2 billion. Eddie was assigned to personally serve 5 specific VIPs, each arriving from international locations with substantial cash deposits. The assignments were prestigious, recognition of Eddie's status as the casino's most trusted butler. He would handle every aspect of their stay, from airport pickup to suite preparation to, most importantly, the processing of their gaming deposits. Eddie spent the weeks before the invitational meticulously preparing his plan. He obtained genuine casino stationery from the financial services department, claiming he needed it to prepare informational packets for arriving guests. He purchased a professional-grade embossing seal that matched the casino's official mark, the kind of equipment readily available to anyone willing to pay. He practiced creating deposit envelopes that were visually identical to authentic ones, perfecting the weight, the seal, the documentation formatting. He also prepared his escape route. Using a false identity he had cultivated over several years, Eddie booked a private charter flight from Las Vegas to Nassau, Bahamas, scheduled to depart at 4:15 in the morning on the 4th day of the invitational. The charter company was one frequently used by the casino's wealthy guests, so the booking appeared routine rather than suspicious. He arranged accommodations in Nassau under the same false name and established banking relationships with offshore financial institutions that specialized in discrete wealth management. Eddie converted portions of his legitimate savings into cryptocurrency, which he transferred to anonymous wallets accessible from anywhere in the world. He researched countries with favorable tax treaties and limited extradition agreements. He studied how to establish residency in nations where financial privacy was protected by law and where American law enforcement had limited reach. He was thorough, patient, thinking years ahead rather than days. The first night of the Invitational arrived with the controlled chaos Eddie had anticipated. The casino buzzed with energy as guests gathered in the private gaming salons. Eddie moved through the crowd with his characteristic grace, ensuring drinks were refreshed, the dietary requirements were met, that every guest felt attended to without feeling monitored. He was the invisible facilitator, making everything appear effortless. At 9:45 p.m., his first assigned VIP arrived from Hong Kong, a shipping magnate whose personal wealth exceeded the GDP of small nations. The man handed Eddie a leather portfolio containing $3.5 million in bearer bonds and cash, instructing him to convert it to casino credit. Eddie accepted the portfolio with a respectful nod, assuring the guest that the transaction would be processed immediately and that credit would be available within the hour. Eddie carried the portfolio through the casino's service corridors, following the established route to the financial services holding room. Security cameras tracked his movement, recording nothing unusual. He entered the holding room, placed the portfolio on the designated shelf, and documented the deposit in the logbook. Then, in the brief moment when he stood in the camera blind spot, Eddie made the switch. He removed the bearer bonds and cash from the portfolio and replaced them with identically sized bundles of cut paper wrapped in currency straps. He resealed the portfolio with meticulous care, ensuring the weight and appearance remained unchanged. The authentic deposits went into a canvas messenger bag he wore beneath his jacket. Eddie left the holding room, walked to the decommissioned service corridor, and placed the messenger bag in his storage locker. The entire process took less than 8 minutes. By 10:15, the guest casino credit had been approved, and he was gambling at a private baccarat table, completely unaware that his deposit existed only as an administrative fiction. Over the next 3 nights, Eddie repeated the process 5 more times with 4 additional VIPs. Each transaction followed the same pattern. Accept deposit, document receipt, grant casino credit, make the switch in the blind spot, secure the authentic funds in the storage locker. The envelope decoys were perfect replicas, and because the system relied on trust rather than immediate verification, nobody questioned their contents. The deposits would be reconciled in the morning, and by morning, Eddie would be gone. The final night of Eddie's plan unfolded with mechanical precision. He worked his normal shift, attending to his assigned guests with his usual professionalism. He confirmed that all 5 VIPs were engaged in gaming activities and unlikely to need his services before morning. He made casual remarks to colleagues about feeling tired, about looking forward to his upcoming days off. Everything appeared routine. At 3:45 in the morning, during the dead hours when the casino's energy had ebbed and most staff were focused on end-of-shift procedures, Eddie made his move. He changed from his Butler uniform into casual traveling clothes in a restroom on an unused floor. He left his uniform folded neatly on a hanger in his storage locker, along with his employee badge and his work phone. The locker contained nothing else, no personal items, no evidence of his true intentions. From the storage locker, Eddie retrieved the canvas messenger bag containing $18.7 million in bearer bonds, cash, and negotiable instruments. The bag was heavy but not unmanageably so. He slung it over his shoulder, walked through the service corridor to a staff exit that led to the employee parking structure, and got into a rental car he had positioned there days earlier. The car was registered under his false identity. Within minutes, he was driving away from the Imperial Mirage, heading toward the private aviation terminal where his chartered flight waited. By 4:30, Eddie was airborne, the lights of Las Vegas receding below as the small jet climbed into the pre-dawn darkness. He had timed the departure perfectly. The casino's morning shift wouldn't begin reconciliation procedures for another 3 hours. Even when discrepancies were discovered, the initial assumption would be documentation errors rather than theft. By the time anyone realized that actual deposits were missing and that Eddie Lang was somehow involved, he would be in international airspace, beyond the immediate reach of American law enforcement. The flight to Nassau took approximately 5 hours. Eddie spent the time reviewing his plans, going over the steps that would transform him from fugitive to ghost. He had researched extensively, understanding that the first 72 hours after discovery would be critical. Law enforcement would move quickly once the theft was confirmed, issuing warrants, alerting border agencies, freezing financial accounts. Eddie needed to establish his new identity and begin dispersing the stolen funds before those systems could catch up with him. In Nassau, Eddie transferred from the private charter to a commercial flight to Barbados, using different false documentation. The Bahamas would be an obvious destination for investigators to check, so he had planned to use it only as a waypoint. From Barbados, he would move to less predictable locations, places where Americans were common enough that one more wouldn't attract attention, but where financial scrutiny was less intense. Back at the Imperial Mirage, the morning shift accountant arrived at 7 a.m. to begin processing the overnight VIP deposits. The procedure was routine. Retrieve the sealed envelopes from the holding room, open them in the presence of witnesses, verify contents against documentation, log the physical assets, and transfer them to the main vault. The accountant expected the process to take about an hour. The first envelope she opened contained the $3.5 million deposit from the Hong Kong shipping magnate. When she broke the seal and emptied the contents onto the counting table, cut paper spilled out instead of bearer bonds. For a moment she stared at it in confusion, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Then she opened the second envelope. More cut paper, then the third. By the fourth envelope, her hands were shaking as she called for her supervisor. Within minutes, the holding room was filled with increasingly senior casino executives, all of them staring at the evidence of a theft so brazen it seemed impossible. The envelopes were perfect forgeries. The seals appeared authentic. The documentation was flawless. But instead of nearly $19 million in deposits, they had stacks of worthless paper cut to the exact dimensions of currency and bonds. Security footage was immediately reviewed. The videos showed Eddie Lang making each deposit delivery, following proper protocols, documenting everything correctly. The only unusual element was the brief moment when he stood in the blind spot near the shelving units. But even that was difficult to interpret as suspicious, without already knowing that a theft had occurred. The casino's head of security realized with sinking certainty that they had been victims of a sophisticated inside job executed by the one person nobody would ever suspect. Attempts to contact Eddie went straight to voicemail. Security personnel were dispatched to his apartment and found it mostly empty, with only basic furniture and no personal items. His car was gone. His employee locker at the casino contained only his uniform and badge. A check with human resources revealed that Eddie had requested his next 2 weeks as vacation time months in advance, claiming he planned to visit family on the East Coast. There had been nothing suspicious about the request. By 9 a.m., the FBI's Las Vegas field office had been notified, and agents were en route to the Imperial Mirage. By noon, a federal arrest warrant had been issued for Edward Lang on charges including grand theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the United States and internationally. Border patrol stations were alerted, airlines were contacted, financial institutions were notified to freeze any accounts associated with his name. But Eddie had anticipated all of this. The identity he had used to book his flights was completely separate from his Edward Lang identity, created years earlier with authentic-looking but fraudulent documents. The bank accounts he accessed were in offshore jurisdictions that didn't automatically cooperate with American law enforcement requests. He had never used traceable electronic payments for his escape preparations, paying for everything in cash accumulated over years of legitimate work. The FBI's investigation quickly identified the sophistication of Eddie's planning. Agents discovered that he had been researching money laundering techniques, studying offshore banking systems, and learning about countries with strong financial privacy laws. Digital forensics revealed that he had used encrypted communications and privacy-focused browsers to conduct his research, making it difficult to fully trace his activities. Most troubling for investigators was the realization that Eddie had been planning this for years, not months. The false identity had been established long before he even began working at the Imperial Mirage. He had built his reputation for reliability specifically to gain access to the VIP deposit system. Every perfect transaction, every glowing recommendation, every year of flawless service had been part of a long-term strategy to position himself for this one enormous theft. 1 week after the theft, Eddie's false passport was flagged at an airport in Barbados, but by the time local authorities responded to the alert, he had already departed. Surveillance footage showed a man matching his description boarding a regional flight, but the destination wasn't immediately clear. The trail went cold. The FBI investigation, officially designated Operation Butler, expanded internationally. Agents worked with Interpol, with financial crime units in the Caribbean and Central America, with banking regulators in offshore jurisdictions. They followed electronic breadcrumbs, analyzed financial transactions, interviewed anyone who had ever worked with Eddie. The investigation consumed thousands of hours and cost millions of dollars, but produced few concrete leads. Investigators theorized that Eddie had divided the stolen funds and moved them through multiple channels. Some of the bearer bonds had likely been sold through private brokers in countries with less stringent verification requirements. The cash could have been deposited into offshore accounts under corporate shells, then moved through a series of transfers designed to obscure its origin. Cryptocurrency transactions, virtually untraceable if done correctly, might have been used to convert and relocate substantial portions of the money. The Imperial Mirage offered a $1 million reward for information leading to Eddie's arrest and the recovery of the stolen funds. The casino's insurance company conducted its own parallel investigation. The Nevada Gaming Commission launched a comprehensive audit of VIP deposit procedures across all major Las Vegas properties, identifying similar vulnerabilities in multiple casinos and mandating immediate protocol changes. But none of these efforts produced Eddie's location. He had vanished as completely as the $18.7 million, leaving behind only questions and the disturbing realization that the casino industry's most trusted employees might also be its greatest vulnerability.